Hello, my name is Christine Marie Eberle, and my favorite thing is pilgrimage.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we learn about people's favorite things and we get recommendations without using an algorithm. Listeners know that I love when guests return, and I love when authors return with new books. So this week, I'm very excited. Christine Marie Eberle is back, and she has a new book coming out this month. Well, the month of the record, which is January of 2025, called Finding God Along the Way. Christine, how are you doing?
Leah, I am doing so well, and I am absolutely tickled to be back with you.
I'm so excited. Let's get into it.
Okay.
Because this time your favorite thing and your new book are very entwined.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit first about the book, and then we're going to deep dive on the experience that informed the book. How about that?
Sure.
Finding God Along the Way is published by Paraclete Press. Tell me about it.
So, okay. So you and I last talked in the spring of 22. In the fall of 22, I and my husband went on a month-long pilgrimage in Spain in the company of a group of people whose average age was 67. And I'm sure we will circle back to that. But when people hear pilgrimage and Spain in the same sentence, they think of the Camino. And when people say the Camino, they mean the Camino del Santiago, the route that appears in the Martin Sheen movie, The Way,
right.
Which, is a great movie.
And my understanding is that it is it's a path that, now I don't know if it's Christians or Catholics, so you'll have to tell me that you go through a number of churches. It's a pilgrimage, so it's religious, but I know that it is hiking. It's that there's like little hostels along the way, and I assume a lot of churches, or maybe you're just walking to one church. I actually know nothing about it now that I'm saying it out loud.
Okay, well, I'll say a thing or two about that, and then I will tell you that that's not the Camino we did.
Okay.
So the Camino de Santiago is the famous one. Santiago de Compostela, which is in sort of the far northwestern corner of Spain, is where the bones of Saint James are believed to be buried. And it has been a pilgrimage route for, 1,000 years maybe. So it's been a pilgrimage route since before there was a distinction between Catholic and Christian, for example. And so some people come from France. The French route is very popular. There's a slightly less traveled Portuguese route, but everybody converges on this place. And, it's religious, it's spiritual. I think the movie The Way was probably somewhat accurate in that, one guy was on it to lose weight and Martin Sheen was on it because he was grieving. People might have a religious or a spiritual motivation or a whole variety of motivations for making that particular or any pilgrimage. So that's the famous one. We made a different Camino because Camino simply means the way or the road, the path. So the one that we made is called the Ignatian Camino, which follows the footsteps of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who you and I talked about last time, founder of the Jesuits, from his birthplace of Loyola, which is in the Basque country, the Basque Mountains in Spain, sort of southeast to Montserrat and Manresa and eventually Barcelona.
Okay.
And he himself made this pilgrimage after he recovered from his devastating cannonball injury and had something of a religious conversion. As I said last time, a conversion from a lukewarm Catholic to a more devout Catholic. And he blasted out of his hometown, determined to make a pilgrimage. Really, where he wanted to get to was the Holy Land, where his original intention was to convert Muslims and be martyred. That was the goal. Wild, yes. Fortunately, I'm fast forwarding a great deal. Fortunately, when he got to the Holy Land after many trials and ordeals and adventures, there was a Franciscan friar who was sort of in charge of the Christian holy places in the Holy Land. And Ignatius told the friar what his goal was. And the friar said, "Young man, go home. You may not stay here." Because if Ignatius had not been martyred but merely kidnapped, the Franciscans were going to have to pay the ransom.
Yep.
And they didn't want any part of that.
Yeah.
So, and Ignatius was, he was young and headstrong and reckless, but he was respectful of authority. And so, he protested a bit, but when the Franciscans said, no, go home, he went home. And that's how we have Jesuit colleges and universities today.
I cannot imagine walking from Spain to Jerusalem and being told to go home and walking back home.
Right. Now there were some boats involved, but
sure.
Yes, to go to really, and I mean, it was Spain to Rome to Jerusalem. He had to find passage.
Right.
It really was an amazing story. So in 2022, we hit the 500th anniversary of his pilgrimage. And so we were lucky to follow in his footsteps in the very same year that he did it. But in the years leading up to that big 500th anniversary celebration, the Jesuits have been developing this pilgrimage route and publicizing it more. And there is an office of the Ignatian Camino in Manresa, Spain, run by an amazing Jesuit named Father Jose Iriberri, who was our guide for our pilgrimage. And so I'm involved with an organization called the Ignatian Volunteer Corps. It's a national organization that places people 50 and better, some much better, in long-term 1 or 2 day a week volunteer placements in charitable organizations that need their skills and couldn't possibly afford them. And then gathers those volunteers once a month for reflection, spiritual formation, conversation, education. It's really a wonderful program. So my husband is a volunteer here in Philadelphia at an urban farm. My brother is on the national staff working in advancement and marketing. And I do many things for them, including facilitate the monthly reflection gatherings for the virtual community, something we have COVID to thank for.
Yep.
During the pandemic, when suddenly the last thing most charitable organizations wanted was senior citizens showing up to volunteer 2 days a week.
Yeah.
Many placements went virtual. They discovered all sorts of things that people could do without leaving their homes, which is when we realized, hey, maybe you don't need to be in one of the 17 cities where IVC has a geographical footprint in order to be an Ignatian volunteer.
Yeah.
And so now, for example, there's a man in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, who is teaching in a refugee camp in Africa.
Wow.
There's a woman in Santiago, Chile, who's teaching college readiness classes to Spanish-speaking immigrants in Richmond, Virginia.
Phenomenal.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And so those monthly meetings happen via Zoom, and they have hired me to lead those meetings, and it is such a grace. Fascinating people, wonderful placements, intriguing conversations every month.
Yeah.
So this is the organization. So in celebration, IVC was turning 25 in 2022, and Mary McGinnity, who's their president and CEO, wanted to do many things in celebration of that anniversary, one of which was she wanted to send IVC folks on the Ignatian Camino.
Okay.
So service corps members, board members, staff, friends, let's get a pilgrimage together. And of course, there's a real muddy sea of details between that big idea and people putting on boots and getting on the road. And
Right.
so she asked me if I would be willing to help plan it. And when she made the invitation, I was so close to stepping down from my day job in campus ministry and moving into this freelance existence. And I hadn't even heard of the Ignatian Camino, though the Camino del Santiago had been on my bucket list for approximately forever.
Right.
And I had loved the Ignatius story since college. I had a course in college called Jesuit Spirit in Action. We had to read Ignatius's autobiography. So the thought of being able to see these places, and I thought of myself as a walker, you know, and so to be able to visit these places and really walk it like Ignatius walked it, though in retrospect Ignatius actually did a great deal of it on a mule, but
also, Ignatius did it in not modern shoes. With
this is true.
Licking base layers. Like, I think about it all the time because I did the breast cancer 3-day twice.
Oh, yeah.
Strangely, before I was a decade before I was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Yeah, when you were healthy enough to do it, sure.
Healthy enough to do it. And 60-mile walks over the course of 3 days.
Oof, yeah.
And all the time, when I read Holocaust stories, when I read pilgrimage stories, when you read these stories of people who walked.
Migrants and refugees today.
Migrants, refugees. And I'm like, I did it with like 2 pairs of tennis shoes that I wore. You know, I cycled through them. And every 3 miles I had a first aid stop, and I had frozen peanut butter and jelly sandwiches
Right.
When I think about how babied I was and I still had to get in the van and be driven to camp.
Yeah. Ignatius was doing it like in sandals with a leg injury and all his worldly possessions on his body.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stunning.
I think about it all the time.
Yeah. So, so I said yes pretty rapidly. And this was would have been in the spring or summer of 2019. We finally green-lit the thing in the fall of 2019. We agreed that my brother and I were going to lead this adventure, and he would be the home team and the one actually on the staff and dealing with money and all that jazz, and I would be the away team.
And were you recruiting from volunteers across the country or just Philly?
Oh, no, across the country,
Okay.
from anybody in the IVC world. Okay. So not necessarily Service Corps members, but anybody with a connection to IVC, we were recruiting. And Father Jose in Spain also had a handful of people who were looking for an English-speaking Camino. And if we had space, could we take them too? And that wound up being a great grace as well. So we advertised. We gathered our cohort. We had our first meeting.
Did you have your first meeting in like February of 2020?
Just about.
Oh, the fortune. We know what's going to happen.
Bump. Yeah, we can feel it coming. So how ridiculous is this, though, hindsight and all that? When the pandemic hit, Stephen and I communicated with the group, and we announced our intention to press on with guarded optimism. And Porter and I, in April of 2020, bought airline tickets for September.
September of 2020?
Yeah.
Oh.
I know.
Oh, no.
So it very quickly became clear that was a bad idea. So we said, okay, that's okay. We'll just punt till spring. Mm-hmm. And it pretty quickly also became clear that spring was not a good idea.
Right.
And so, okay, we'll punt till fall. Surely a 1-year postponement will be sufficient. And every time we did this, Father Jose totally rejiggered the schedule. He rebooked all our accommodations. He made a plan for our meals, over and over again. And when it was getting to be time to buy airline tickets once again, I sent an email to the group and I said, okay, I want a 1-word answer. Hot, warm, or cold? Where are you on this? And almost everyone said cold.
Yeah.
No, they didn't want to risk getting sick. They didn't want to risk having to make the the Camino while wearing masks and being
Right.
6 feet apart and, all that jazz. And so once we postponed one more time, so 3 postponements, 2 years and 1 month after our original date, we set out with a group that was some of the original people and some brand new people. The group shifted. I had 54 people express interest over the course of those years.
Wow.
And 25 of us made the Camino.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And you and your husband went,
Yes.
and you said the average age was 67.
67. I was the second youngest person
Wow.
at 57 at the time. The oldest person to make the full Camino was 79 years old.
Amazing.
Yep. And I will say, he walked every step of the way. And then we had 10 people, the 15 of us did the whole thing. 10 people joined us for the last 100 miles.
Okay.
And of those people, there were 2 women in their 80s. So this was not a bunch of gap year kids backpacking around Europe.
Right.
We were firmly in the autumn of life, as they say.
So I pulled up the website, Camino
Ignaciano.
Ignaciano.org.
See?
And it has this very cool, here are the 35 days of the pilgrimage.
Mm-hmm.
And as you scroll over, it's 19.6 kilometers, 13 kilometers, 30 kilometers. So they make it real clear what you're signing up for.
Yes, this is not for sissies.
No. Logistics chat.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a car that would come and get you if you couldn't finish?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, we were not usually on roads, so we might have to get to the next place where the path crossed a road.
Sure.
There was definitely a day when 2 of the men practically carried someone the last mile to the nearest intersection.
Yeah.
But yes, there was a car that could come. And is your next question, was our luggage transported?
Yeah, I was getting there.
Yeah. So yes, our luggage
Okay.
was transported from place to place. We had to carry what we needed for the day,
Okay.
which was sometimes not insignificant. But
No, because you're carrying your food, water, first aid kits,
all
layers
that.
of clothes,
Right.
your bug spray. I mean, some things you can share between people, but you still probably have, 20 pounds that you're carrying every day?
Probably not 20,
Not
but
20?
probably 10 or
Okay.
15. There's no age, Leah, at which I could have carried my entire world on my back.
Yeah.
I couldn't have done it at 20.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so your luggage is transported for you. There is a car if you need to tap out for the day.
Yes.
That makes me feel better.
Yes. There are also, cabs and buses and trains and all of which got used in various ways, but
Yeah.
keep going.
And this was a fall walk, a fall pilgrimage?
Yes. October into early November.
Okay. Is Spain sort of, was it, when I think of autumnal, was it were the leaves changing or was it still kind of warm?
Both. It was definitely autumn. We walked
Okay.
through a lot of vineyards that were pretty crunchy. But Spain was having its worst heat wave in 100 years. So there were a couple, I would say for the most part, we had spectacular weather. It rained a couple of times. I think there was only one day that I was wearing all the clothes I could be wearing and wished I had had one more layer.
Wow.
But
okay.
there were also some days, many people wore shorts. There were a couple of days when sunburn was a genuine risk. So it was a great time of year to go.
Okay. So you're following the path of Loyola, of Ignatius from Loyola.
Yes.
And you have, was it Jose, Father Jose?
Father Jose, yes.
He is going with you.
Uh-huh.
What makes it a pilgrimage and not a hike?
Right. Great question. So
I assume some regular acts of prayer
Yes.
and teachings.
Mm-hmm.
But like, does just following the path make it a pilgrimage, or does prayer make it a pilgrimage? Or
Well,
does intention?
That's exactly the word I was about to use. Intention absolutely is what makes it a pilgrimage.
Okay.
And I think pilgrimage also has a specific destination. People can do a pilgrimage to many, many places, but there is always a destination in mind. And for us, how we went also had a great deal to do with it. So Father Jose had prepared for us our Pilgrim's Book, one more thing for us to carry.
Okay.
That could go in the checked luggage or in the transported luggage. So the Pilgrim's Book had some prayers and reflection prompts and readings for each day. And we were encouraged to peruse it the night before and sort of have a few points in mind. So he didn't expect us to be flipping through the book as we walked, but so to sort of call to mind, maybe we'd have like a tiny notebook with us. You know, what were the points we wanted to meditate on? And then as we would start out, when we got, sometimes we would wait till we were out of the whatever town we had slept in and back into wilderness, but the first 2 hours of every walk were to be in prayerful silence.
Okay.
And so, you know, we'd get out of the town and we'd find the path, and then he would gather us up in a circle, and he would he'd give us whatever instructions we needed about where to stop, where or when to stop, and then he would sort of summarize the meditation points for the day and say a little prayer. And we had a song, verse of a song that we sang, the same verse every time. We would sing our little verse of the song, and we'd start walking. And we'd go for the next 2 hours. Now, sometimes there would be sort of a need to pause at the 1 hour mark, and he would gather us up, you know, pause us, send us to the bathroom or whatever,
Sure.
you know, and then regather us. But we always did at least the 2 hours. And so the prayerfulness was definitely part of it. And we were following, somewhat loosely, we were following the 4-week spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. Now, if we were actually making the exercises, there would have been a lot more prayer, a lot more conversation with the spiritual director. So we weren't making the exercises, which is a key part of the Ignatian world. But we were praying with that prayer material. We were using some of the same scripture passages, some of the key texts of St. Ignatius himself, and we were using it in the order that these things appear in the spiritual exercises. So the basic arc of the journey was a kind of familiar one.
Okay, so you get up, you have breakfast and coffee, you chit chat, and it's not until you're on the road and you're like, okay, we're out of earshot of the people walking their dogs, right? Now
Yes.
we're gonna start the prayerful walking, intentional walking portion of the morning. And did you find that once the 2 hours of silence was complete, were the conversations, did you tend to pair up, like, would you gossip or would you talk about the things that you thought about during your meditation?
I would say that there was very little gossip.
Yeah.
People might not have been ready to unpack their prayer immediately to one another, but I think it affected the quality of our conversations. You know, we didn't go from, you know, praying with the invitation of Jesus to follow him on the road to Real Housewives of Anywhere.
Right.
You know, so we talked about our lives a lot. You know, in the various ministries people are involved in. We talked about struggles. Of that group of 15 who started out, three of the 10 women had been widowed. So that was very poignant. A couple of people were suffering with sciatica. There had been some cancer diagnoses. So there was very real stuff that we talked about as we walked. And we did.
Well, and as a collective, you're coming out of COVID.
Yes.
You're like entering the next chapter of COVID.
Right. Next chapter of COVID and next chapter of our lives.
Yeah.
And we did tend to walk in, I'm going to say 2s or 3s, so the conversation stayed kind of intimate.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of sort of rotating pairing off. Some people were almost always in front. Some people, myself included, almost always in back. Because you know what? Even though I think of myself as a fast walker, that was only relative to the people I usually walk with.
Right. That was relative to college campus.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Back of the pack. I was at the back of the pack. But even within that, there was a lot of sort of swapping off, and there was no one in the group that I didn't have a really quality conversation with at some point.
Now, your husband was also on the trip. Was there anyone else in the pilgrimage that you had, say, a 5+ year relationship with?
Not at all.
Okay.
There, with the exception of the 79-year-old, is Dave Hinchin, who runs the Ignatian Volunteer Corps community in New England.
Okay.
I had met Dave, but I didn't know him. And we had about 3 Zoom calls to prepare. But I got to say, when we flew to Barcelona, almost all of us, and stayed in the same hotel, almost all of us, and then met on the sidewalk to walk to dinner the night before we were leaving Barcelona for Loyola. And despite the 3 Zoom calls, I didn't know who anybody was. I guessed wrong every single time.
Yeah.
So they were all strangers. And it was people from this country, but it was also, we had 3 people from Australia.
Oh, wow.
None of whom was born in Australia. So it was a couple from South Africa who had emigrated to Australia, and a woman from Malaysia who was living in Australia. So a fascinating group.
Were you and your husband, were there days, did you always walk part of the days together? Were the conversations on this walk some of the deepest of your marriage? Did this bring you closer together, or were you oh, there's 25 other people to talk to, let's go gather stories and then we will have done this together, but we don't need to be together on the walk?
Right. So we never had that conversation. We turned out not to walk together very often, to the point where my brother said afterwards he was worried that we were fighting because we were never standing near each other in the group photos that were being sent home for social media purposes. But we really were not.
Right.
He is almost a foot taller than I am.
Okay.
His legs are dramatically longer than mine.
Yeah.
And I was really near the back of the pack, and he was trying to stay near the front of the slinky, as we put it, because what would happen was Father Jose would say, okay, when you reach this town, stop at the bus stop, or stop at this intersection. And the people in front would walk there, and they would stop. And when the back of the slinky had caught up, he would say, okay, pilgrims, let's go. And we would start again. So the exhausted people at the back.
The slinky never gets to rest.
Exactly.
Not fair.
Totally not fair. The fit people in front got all the rest they could possibly desire. So he was trying to stay closer to the front for the sake of getting those rest breaks. And I just had to do my best. So was often, trailing along. We did have one really amazing day when, and I'm fast forwarding probably more than about 3 weeks into the pilgrimage. I was a mess one morning leaving Cervera. I got my first blister on day 0. Just walking around Loyola in my sneakers.
Yeah.
And by about day 11, I think I had 7 what I called named blisters.
Oh my gosh.
It was horrifying. And so on this particular morning, we left Cervera before dark. I had not gotten my painkillers on board in a timely fashion. It was a rocky, steep descent, and moments it felt like into the starting off, I was by myself. Like I could not even see anyone. And I had forgotten my headlamp.
Oh no.
When I got to the base of the walls, they hadn't actually taken off without me. They were gathered up at the bottom to begin their little prayer orientation time. So I got Porter's attention and I said, please do not leave me alone today. And because I had been crying coming down the hill. So it was clear. And so he was a gem. He stuck by me totally from that point. And Betsy threw me her headlamp. So I had a little light to travel by. But we indeed were well behind the pack for a lot of the beginning of the walk. And there came a point where we were walking through this scrubby field, and then we were to cross a fairly desolate highway and go off into the trees on the other side. And when Porter and I finally got to the highway, we discover Father Jose patiently waiting for us on the other side. We're like, oh, damn it. I said, oh, he's going to take us out. He's going to tell us to wait for a taxi. I can feel it coming. Yeah. Because the group had to travel at a certain pace.
Sure.
And
especially on some of these like 30 kilometer, 25 plus kilometer days. These are not short walks.
Right. And there was a day later when, it might have even been the next day, he had to call a taxi 3 times. Like 3 times he had to put people in a vehicle. And the walk took so much longer than it should have taken. So anyway, he does not, in fact, say, wait here for a taxi. He says, he kind of looks down the road. He says, okay, you two. And he points down the road. He says, road, roundabout, bridge, bus stop. Wait for us.
He gives you the shortcut.
He gives us the shortcut. I don't know why everyone else isn't taking the shortcut.
Right.
But
he knows what you need.
He knows what we need. Yes. Yeah. And we were still in prayerful silence, but not for long, because we had an amazing. We just had not had the opportunity, either because we weren't walking near each other, and when we got to our room, if we were sharing a room, because that was not always the case. Sometimes it was pilgrim shelters when I was with the women and he was with the men. We were just exhausted. Like all we could talk about was blister maintenance, because he had giant blisters on the bottom of his feet. Oh. I had the most, he had the biggest. Like all we could talk about is like what we needed to do for the blisters and what we had to do for the next day. It was all logistics in the room. So the sun was just coming over the horizon. We were by ourselves. It was a quiet road. We just had such a profound conversation, and were absolutely refreshed and engaged for the rest of the journey. By the time people reached the bus stop, shocked to discover us there and happy. Like they too thought we had been tossed in a taxi.
Right.
So yeah, we were not often walking together, but not out of any desire not to walk together, but just that's the way it fell out.
Wow.
Yeah.
I just can't. There was the first time I did the 3-day, I think it was the third morning we woke up and we had slept in a closed office. It was raining in Atlanta. So the first night we slept in an office building that didn't have anybody stay, like an empty office building where they taped on the floor where our sleeping bags went. And we just slept in huge, where cubicles should have been, we slept.
Oh.
And then the next night we slept in our tents. And one of those mornings I woke up, we're at breakfast, and I was in so much pain. And one of the guys was like, here, you want this pill for my back surgery? And I was like, yeah. And I took it and I was like, I didn't ask you what it was. There was not a moment. You're just like, I'm tired. I want to be sleeping, even if it's in a tent.
Yeah.
And now I'm awake. My feet hurt. And I signed up for this.
Right.
And we got to go.
Yeah.
Like this was a choice
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yes. So Leah, we talked about being amazed at people who have done this and migrants and
Yeah.
refugees. And one of the things we wound up really praying with was like being conscious of all the people on the move against their will all over the world.
Yeah.
And we really were trying to pray in solidarity with that, thinking, as you said, we've got this, the moisture wicking underlayers and the special socks and the hiking poles and those special backpacks with the straps,
Right.
and
the money to pay a cab when you just can't do it anymore.
right, and a room reserved for us and a meal for us to sit down to. I mean, it was such luxury by the standards of so much of the world. And one night, sometimes we would have these debriefing conversations as a group, and we were talking about this, and I said, we're only doing this for a month, and we volunteered for it. And Father Jose burst out laughing, and he said, volunteered for it? You paid for this.
Right.
Right.
You paid for the honor
Yes.
of the blisters.
Exactly.
So along the way, you said that sometimes it was pilgrimage housing. What were the types of places you slept and ate?
So one of the things that I have to give Father Jose such props for is that he kept switching it up. I think he knew how far he could push us and when he needed to give us a break. So sometimes we'd be in a 2-star hotel, like a lovely little hotel with a little restaurant downstairs where we could have breakfast and dinner. That was sort of the height of the luxury.
Right. Private bathrooms.
Exactly. Private bathrooms, 2 people to a room, all the couples got to be together. Great. Sometimes we would be in hostels, and really, honestly, the places called hostels were pretty much like hotels, just a little more bare bones, and people may or may not be sleeping with their spouses.
Right. You might have 4 or 6 people in a room.
Exactly.
Too.
Yeah. And then there were pilgrims shelters, which are probably what you're picturing: bunk beds, communal bathrooms. Sometimes it would be just us, so all our women in one room, all our men in another room. There was once that we stayed in a pilgrim shelter where we were not the only pilgrims. The other people who joined us. So here's an interesting thing. Our route and the Camino de Santiago cross each other. And so for a while, both kinds of pilgrims were showing up in the same towns. And we were often asked if we were lost because we appeared to be going in the wrong direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So in one of those places, we had Camino de Santiago pilgrims as well. And so it was just one giant room full of bunk beds arranged in little neighborhoods. And it was just go find yourself a bunk. And we had gotten there first, so go to the back. So Porter and I shared a little bunk bed neighborhood with Beth Ann and Canada Jane. And there was Dave and Karen in my line of sight as I, read my little book at night. So that was sort of the most really traditional pilgrim's shelter experience.
Pilgrim shelter, I was about to say manned by nuns.
No.
Are there religious people who part of their service is they like feed and clean and whatever, or they're just like empty shelters and you are responsible for cleaning and feeding?
Absolutely. I don't think we weren't responsible for cleaning anywhere, thank God. So the one that was for everybody was just a service. I mean, it was an entity. There was an innkeeper named Ezekiel.
Okay.
I think a lot of people who have done the Camino de Santiago then sort of go into Camino work, whether it's sheltering people or feeding people. So Ezekiel was a veteran of the Camino de Santiago, and now he runs this hostel, and his brother next door runs a restaurant, and he serves as a waiter. And one of the pilgrim shelter we stayed in was indeed a priest whose ministry that is. He runs the pilgrim shelter, and he's also a chef. So there was a place we stayed that was run by Sisters of Mercy, which was lovely because I used to work for Sisters of Mercy. So it absolutely varied. And in our absolute like bottom of the heap accommodations, reminds me of what you described. We stayed in an empty daycare center on air mattresses on the, I think air mattresses on the floor.
Yeah.
And there was one big room for the women on the far side of the one small room for the men. And then on the other side of the men's dormitory space, there was the bathroom, by which I mean the single-use only bathroom.
Oh, no.
For the 15 or 16 of us. Right next to that, there was a room full of training potties because it was a daycare center.
Right.
And when push comes to shove, one can use a training potty.
Yep.
But, I have to say, I was shocked at how much serenity I had in that particular location. And I don't think it was just because I was exhausted. I felt like a pilgrim. I was able to have some detachment and be grateful for what I had instead of what I lacked. I think back on that night with great fondness.
We were talking before I hit record because we had met right when I finished my cancer treatment. And I was just talking to someone who had been an oncology nurse about my chemo experience. And I was with my friend Ronnie we were talking at a party. And I was like, I look back at the first day of chemo now as kind of a fun day. We played hooky from work. And he went to 3 different restaurants to get the perfect lunch.
Aww.
And except for the 4 minutes when I had an allergic reaction to my chemotherapy and it was awful.
Yeah.
I now have these really fond memories of a nice day.
Yeah.
With a friend.
Because you weren't sick yet and the nurses are so kind.
Right. Yeah. I didn't know what was coming.
Yeah, right. Brace yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. Can I read you 3 paragraphs about that daycare center experience? Okay, because I was sure I was going to get to read at some point. And so, okay, I'm just going to, this isn't about the sleeping, this is something else. But since we're on this day and this is the page I had my book open to, let's go for it. And then you can queue up your next question.
Okay.
So this is from a chapter called, Now, Where Did I Leave That Comfort Zone? And I start out talking about the fact that I had really almost no experience of peeing outside. I wasn't a hiker. I wasn't a Girl Scout. So the whole, where are we going to go to the bathroom was a source of great stress and adventure.
Yeah.
Which eventually I did. So here, I'll start here. I waited my turn to slip behind whatever protective covering presented itself. Until a day in our second week when Father Jose directed the women up a wooded path and I really had to go. Flinging modesty aside, I joined them and discovered it was more private than I'd feared, as everyone maintained custody of the eyes. From that day on, I was a convert, gladly joining the other women as we found creative places to relieve ourselves. On our final hike, we headed into the trees and prepared to get busy, only to hear Father Jose sing out, "I can still see you." I sang back, "Then turn around." What a difference a few weeks had made. I was shoved out of my comfort zone for good when we arrived in Fuenmayor, and Father Jose ushered us into an unoccupied daycare center. "Find your suitcase," he ordered, indicating the heap of transported luggage. "Get what you need to shower and follow me." A strange parade ensued as we made our way through town carrying towels, toiletries, and changes of clothes. When we reached the recreation center, the women queued up outside the ladies' shower room. Then in we all went together. One big room, many shower nozzles. I had never showered in a group. Ever. My high school didn't have a serious gym requirement. I hadn't played sports or even gone to summer camp. My family had been so modest that I was almost entirely unfamiliar with other women's bodies. What was I going to do? Get in the shower, that's what. After a stunned moment in which we all considered just how much closer we were about to get, the women burst out laughing and shrugged out of our dusty hiking clothes. There weren't enough nozzles for everyone to shower at once, so half of us huddled in skimpy towels waiting our turn. Someone, who shall remain nameless, had forgotten hers. Another woman kindly pumped long sheets of paper towel from the dispenser for her to cover and later dry herself with. Yet another sweet moment between pilgrims. The whole escapade was so ridiculous and unexpected. We shrieked with helpless laughter for the duration. After we dressed and rejoined the men in the lobby, they pointed out that we sounded like we'd had much more fun than they did. Later, I learned that the men's shower room had private stalls. I might have been envious at the time, but in retrospect, I would not trade the women's definitive bonding experience. So, there you have it.
That's perfect. I'm so glad you shared that right now.
Yeah, it seemed the moment.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, where do we go from there?
Where in the timeline of the pilgrimage was that shower?
That's a great question. So you know what? I have my whole schedule in front of me here. The day that we arrived in Fuenmayor, it was day 7. So we were one week in.
All right. So comfortable enough with each other to like, all right, we're gonna take the next dive into our relationships. Because I can imagine day 1, you would have like tried harder to be modest, right? You would have been trying harder to, we'll wait outside or. Yeah.
Actually, now that I look at the schedule, we had not. It was our first. We had only been in hotels with our significant others, or assigned roommate.
Okay.
To that point. So this, or there was one that retreat center with the Sisters of Mercy. We had these lovely little private cells. But yeah, we had not had to share yet. Yeah. So the first time we had to share was the day we also, by the way, had to get naked with each other and then all sleep in the same room.
But at that point, you've been walking a week.
Yes.
So.
Go big or go home.
Yeah. When you look back, is that one of the biggest laughs of the trip, or were there some other joyful highlights?
Oh, that's a great question. So that's probably the biggest one, but I'm just sort of skimming my notes and times. Here's a fun one. Here's a fun Father Jose story. So much later, so day 15, so a week later, we're still just the 15 of us. It's the about 2 days before we're about to be joined by the 10 more people. We had set off. We left Zaragoza, and sometimes it was just too far between lodgings, especially right in the middle. It was too far between lodgings for us to not have some transportation involved. Yeah. So we set out from Zaragoza. We took a little walk, a short bus ride to the edge of the desert. And we were going to walk through the desert, and the goal. But we left super early. We left at we left at 5 a.m. Like walked out the door at 5 a.m. And we were going to. And this is very high latitude, and it was October, so sunrise was at about 8:20. I could never get used to that. So we left at 5 a.m. and we were going to walk through the desert in the dark and under the stars and watch the sun come up as we walked, which sounds great, except there was a cloud cover. So we saw neither stars nor sun, but that's okay. We had some very profound time walking across the desert. We finally reached this restaurant that was just by itself in the middle of nowhere on this road. We had lunch, and then we had a very long wait because there was one bus that was going to go from Zaragoza to Bujaraloz, where was our destination, and we had to wait for that bus. As it turned out, by the way, the 2 people who were sick and couldn't walk that day were taking the bus from Zaragoza, but we didn't know that they were going to be on that bus, and they didn't know that we were going to be on that bus.
Okay.
So that was really a fabulous surprise when the time came. Anyway, so we finally get on the bus. We joyfully reunite with our companions. They let us off in Buharalos, and we walk to a place that was a hostel, like hostel rooms, above a 24-hour bus stop buffet.
Okay.
So it's a bus stop, there's a buffet, it's 24 hours, there's
So it's
jukebox
never
going.
it's never gonna be quiet.
Right.
But,
but we've got
any
these
dreams you have of midnight snacks come true.
Exactly. So we gather, and I mean, always the first thing that would happen if we were staying someplace with keys is that Father Jose would gather us up, give us our keys, and then tell us what was next,
Mm-hmm.
So go find your luggage, go to your room. And he says, meet back here at whatever time. So the time, and because we're going to go to the buffet for dinner. So the assigned time comes, we meet back at the designated spot. And Father Jose was forever counting us, the poor man. So he does a quick count, and we're missing 2. So we wait a little while.
To count people.
Constantly.
We will come back to it.
Okay.
We'll start with your missing 2 first.
Yeah. So he counts, the 2 are missing. Does anybody know where, I can't even remember who it was, but does anybody know where these 2 people are? And somebody says, oh, they went into the buffet already. And Father Jose, he almost never had a meltdown, but he says, he gives this big sigh, pilgrims, when I say meet here, do I mean meet over there? I do not. He says, there are about to be 10 more of you. You have to be the very best pilgrims.
You're like, we're the pilgrims who are here.
Right.
We're not the pilgrims who are there.
Right.
We're the pilgrims at the buffet early.
Oh my God, but collectively, there was also, there was this thing called the Bad Pilgrim of the Day Award.
Uh-huh.
and it was usually given to the person somebody was always patty last. I don't know where that expression came from, but somebody was always the last one,
Uh-huh.
So that person got the patty last award. And Bad Pilgrim of the Day might go to, we have had our break. We're all, strapped up and ready to walk again. This is not the time to go find the water fountain.
Uh-huh.
Why are you starting to rummage through your backpack?
Right.
So there was often a Bad Pilgrim of the Day award as well, but they were definitely the ones who got it that day. So you also have a Count the People story?
My very first trip to Israel was with the local federation, which is the Jewish United Way.
Mm-hmm.
Big trip, like 500 young people from across the U.S. going to a conference in Tel Aviv. We went to Yad Vashem. Our bus was all Chicago. And as someone who had recently converted to Judaism, I had not been to a Holocaust museum since I had converted.
Mm.
And people who grew up Jewish are pretty well versed. Like, a lot of people had been to Yad Vashem before. They'd certainly been to the U.S. Holocaust Museum. So most of my group moved faster than me. Mm-hmm. I moved real slow through Yad Vashem because I had not been to a Holocaust museum since my conversion.
Yeah, you weren't like check.
Yep. I did have this was 2006, so I had a rental cell phone. Just a little candy bar rental cell phone. And I finished Yad Vashem and I'm at the bathrooms and I see like Cleveland. I was like, hey, Cleveland, have you seen anyone from Chicago? And they're like, Chicago left. And I'm like, but I'm alone at Yad Vashem. And I go out, and the flip side of the story is a woman who is now one of my very dearest friends was on the bus. And our tour guide was like, we don't need to count. Everybody's here. You're adults. And was like, we don't need to count off, whatever. And the bus starts moving. And my friend Dahlia goes, wait, where's Leah? Where's Leah? And they're like, she's not on the bus. We didn't count off. This is your fault, tour guide. they call me, and the driveway at Yad Vashem is a mile long.
Oh.
So there's no turning around. They have to leave, go out on the highway, like come back around to get me. And they were like, we left the fresh convert behind at the Holocaust Museum. And the bus pulls up and I'm just sitting there, like kind of like sad on a concrete barrier, just alone, waiting for my friends. So you just can't ever get cocky with it. You have to count the bus.
Yeah. When I used to take students to Mexico City, I used to say that the reason we only took 8 students is that that's the most I could count to quickly by twos in Spanish.
Yeah.
2, 4, 5, 8, bueno.
Yeah. And we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
How was that buffet?
It was pretty good.
Yeah.
One other funny story. So Porter was one of the ones who had to take the bus all the way from Zaragoza, because there was a slow-moving stomach virus going through the group, and he was in the midst of that, or he'd had a fever. So the 2 people who were sick had asked. They felt bad that Father Jose was going to have to pay for this buffet for them. And so they asked if they could he just order them like rice, and they would just like have some rice and broth, and he wouldn't have to pay for the whole buffet. So he says yes, and they get their rice and their broth. But then like Porter's a food guy. He worked in food service his whole life. He's wandering around the buffet. He's seeing what looks good. He comes back to his table. I was sitting next to Father Jose. Porter was sitting, I forget where. He comes back with a bowl of gazpacho. And Father Jose turns to me very dryly and says, "Your husband is eating gazpacho. He is not sick."
He's walking tomorrow.
Yep, he did.
At the end of this experience, how long did you... Okay, wait, before I get to this question.
Yeah, we got to get to spiritual lessons at some point.
Yes.
But keep going. Yeah.
Did you have a journal practice? A writing practice on the trip?
Ooh, this is fun. So, obviously I knew I wanted to get a book out of this experience. And so for writing, I used the program Scrivener.
Yes.
And when we first decided to do the Camino, I started a Scrivener project. And I had already been making if I was journaling, during prayer time and something came up about the Camino, I would just start a new file in Scrivener and, date it and give it maybe a topic title and journal there. So when we actually left on the pilgrimage, I had downloaded Scrivener onto my phone, and I bought a wireless keyboard.
Okay.
Like a lightweight wireless keyboard, a little Bluetooth keyboard, so that I could type with all 10 fingers, because I am hopeless with my thumbs, but not have to carry around an iPad or a laptop or, any of those things. So I could type right into Scrivener on my phone. So every day I started an entry, usually in the morning, because, we had to be out the door 45 minutes after the start time of breakfast every day. Yeah, right.
Was there ever a lie-in? Was there a single day you got to sleep in?
Yes, we did. There were a couple. There were like 2, there were maybe 3 rest days, which weren't actually rest days. They were just days we walked all over the town. There was a couple days I couldn't walk because of my feet, and one day that the stomach virus got me. But you still had to have your suitcase packed and with the heat 45 minutes after breakfast starts. So really early on, I have had coffee first thing in the morning since I was in 8th grade, and I am 59 years old. So that was a non-negotiable. I brought instant coffee. I brought an immersion heater. Like I brought everything I needed to make myself like a tiny little cup of instant coffee in the morning. And there are other things that follow morning coffee, So my morning routine was 90 minutes before we had to walk out the door. My alarm would go off. I would chug a bottle of water into which I had put a hydration tablet the night before. I would make my coffee, my little bit of intense coffee, and have my coffee, and then do my praying and my journaling. And usually it was anything I really wanted to capture about the day before. What did we do? What did we talk about? Any really significant things from the prayer time. I really tried to capture what needed capturing. I really tried to capture what needed capturing from the day before. So that was the journal practice that really enabled me to write the book on the far side.
So then from returning from the trip, how long did you marinate on the trip before you started forming the book?
I think that we got back at the beginning of November. I know that I dog sat for my brother maybe in early December. And I know that I wrote my not the first chapter of the book, but the first chapter I took a crack at then. And I know that I had the book in the hands of early readers by July, late June, early July. So it was about and it was to my editor August 1st. So it was about a 9-month writing progress. And the book ends just about 6 months to the day from when we were there. Porter and I had occasion to visit Boston, and 5 of our pilgrim friends live in Boston. And so we had a pilgrim's reunion, complete with bottles of Rioja Valley Tempranillo, and too much food and too many stories. And so I did,
and no walking.
Right, none whatsoever. And though actually the next day we did in fact go for a fairly lengthy walk around Boston. But I decided, we spent a lot of time at that gathering talking about the fruits of the Camino. And so I decided that the 6-month mark really was where I wanted to stop the book.
Yeah.
So chronologically, the events of the book end with that gathering.
Okay.
And then it took me, a handful of weeks past that gathering to actually finish a first draft.
So in the construction of the book, is it a chronological with lessons for every day of the trip, or is it or are you taking the month-long St. Ignatius work that you mentioned?
I do. I know what you're asking. So let me jump to the answer.
How's it organized?
How's it organized? Right, because we love organization. So there is a preamble and a postamble.
Okay.
The preamble is the 3 years leading from the decision, the first inkling of the Camino until we arrive in Spain. So that's the preamble. And the postamble is what happened after we got home and the integration of the experience. And then sandwiched in the middle are 4 sections, which I divide into mountains, vineyards, deserts, and shrines. Because that describes really the topography and the highlights of roughly the 4 weeks of the Camino. So the spiritual exercises are roughly 4 weeks. The pilgrimage was roughly 4 weeks. The book is divided into roughly 4 weeks. And within that, it goes chronologically, but not day 1, day 2, day 3. I don't ever double back and be like, oh, by the way, last week. So it does follow the narrative arc, but sometimes there are thematic chapters. So there's a chapter called Shelter, and it takes place on the day that we got to our first pilgrim shelter. But in it, I also muse in general about the various places where we stayed.
Yeah.
So some chapters are more thematic but they're always sort of pegged to something that was going on at the time. And then there are many chapters per section, except for that last one of Post-Amble, which is just one longer chapter called Pilgrimage is Life.
Mm-hmm. When you imagine people engaging with this book, do you, I mean, once you put it out there, you're not in charge of the book anymore.
Rats.
But do you imagine people taking chapters as part of their daily practice? Is it a sit down, a cozy read over a weekend? Is it a women's retreat book? Like, what are some of the ways you imagine people engaging with the text?
Sure. And the short answer to that is all of the above, because as you pointed out, I'm not in charge. But one of the things I didn't mention about the organization is that, similar to my previous two books, every chapter starts with a scripture quote and ends with some questions for personal reflection. Because the subtitle of the book, which we forgot to mention, both of us, is Wisdom from the Ignatian Camino for Life at Home. Leah, I recognize what an amazing privilege it was to get to do this, to walk away from my life for a month, to have the health, the freedom, the resources. Most people don't get to do that. And so I didn't want this to be a travel guide, although ironically, one of the things Amazon is tracking is where it is ranking as a general Spain travel guide.
Oh, interesting.
It was recently the #1 new release in general Spain travel guides, which, by the way, it is not.
Right.
So there are wonderful books out there that are guides to the Ignatian Camino. Father Jose himself has written 2 of them. The world doesn't need another guide to the Ignatian Camino. So if I just did this fascinating thing and then wrote about it, okay, maybe some people would want to read that, but that's not who my desired audience is.
Yeah.
I want people who spiritually would like to get their heads around what does it mean to live as a pilgrim on this earth. And so what the wisdom, and my original subtitle was Lessons from the Ignatian Camino, but then that sounded a little too, I don't know, pedantic.
Chicken soup for the soul.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to take the kernels of wisdom that I was wrestling with, because wisdom is hard earned. I have a fortune cookie slip in my wallet that says, we learn little from success, but much from failure. So taking those kernels of wisdom that I learned and telling the stories, the fun stories, the peeing in the woods stories, all those things. But then figuring out what is it about ordinary life at home where you can apply this wisdom, and then just asking a couple of prompt questions to get people to make the connection with their own life, whether or not they can walk a single step. So when I picture people, obviously some people are going to plow through this book. Somebody texted me at 11 o'clock one night, and she said, well, I can see I'm going to be up late tonight. I promise I'll go back and read it slowly later.
Yeah.
So some people are plowing through because there is a certain degree of what happened,
Right.
wanting to find out what happened. I have a friend, Dave Burns, who's also a writer, and he was one of my early readers. And some point early in the book, I say, I noticed that the blister, the Band-Aid I had slapped on my Loyola blister, appeared to no longer be doing its job. And in the margin, he wrote, "Cue the spooky music."
Sometimes when I'm reading memoirs with harrowing tales in them, I have to remind myself, it's a memoir. They wrote it after the event. There are more pages. I see there are more pages. This isn't the end. But...
Right. At least they did not die. So there is a sort of a compelling what happened next narrative.
Yeah.
But my hope is that people will pray with it slowly.
Yeah.
So, for example, a couple things. In February, starting next Wednesday, the 4 Wednesday evenings of February, I'm having a book reflection, a book discussion series hosted by one of my favorite retreat centers. The Sisters of St. Joseph have a center for spirituality in Ocean Grove, New Jersey.
Okay.
Right on the beach, or a block from the beach. But it doesn't matter where they are, because this is via Zoom. So just 6:30 to 7:30 on the 4 Wednesday nights of February, when nobody wants to leave their house,
Right.
at least not in the north, we're gonna have a book chat. And the first week is gonna be the preamble. The second week is gonna be mountains and vineyards. The third week is deserts and shrines, and the fourth week is postamble. So a person could read just that material and then come talk to me about it.
How lovely.
I'm really excited about that, because apparently I think there's already 21 people signed up, which is very exciting.
Nice.
Though selfishly, I hope we don't exceed one Zoom screen, though, if we do, that's also a good problem to have.
Right.
Then, of course, the Christian season of Lent is coming up starting March 5th. And this would also be a very nice Lenten prayer practice. And I figured out that if one started on the Monday before Ash Wednesday and prayed with one chapter a day until Easter Monday, one could do the whole book.
Oh.
Yeah, so I have developed a Lent supplement that Paraclete Press, about whom, by the way, I cannot say enough good things. I've written it, they are making it pretty and putting it on their website as a free download, so that if you want to pray with it, chapter a day through Lent, there's a guide, and it tells you, not only what chapter lines up with what day on the calendar. If there is a connection to the scripture reading of the day on the Lenten church calendar, I may draw that out. And it's only like a paragraph a day, but I might ask another reflection question or give a different prompt, sort of specific to the season of Lent. And in the introductory material, I say, do with this what you will. Stay with what moves you. A question from the book, a question from the supplement, a story from the book, a story from the scripture of the day. You do you. But it's something that people can have with them if they would like to use it that way. And I'm doing a lot of retreats all around the theme of living with a pilgrim's heart. I'm doing Lent retreats. I'm doing women's retreats. Like everything I do, it can be an accordion. I'm going to do a week-long guided retreat up in Hampton Bays on Long Island this summer around this theme. And yet I can also do like a fun 90 minutes. So, yeah.
How exciting.
I'm excited.
Now I want you to get in conversation with my rabbi.
Ooh. Well, interestingly, I'm going to call him my rabbi. We have a wonderful synagogue right up the street, and I am friends with Rav Shai, the wonderful rabbi there. My launch party was supposed to be at the synagogue.
Nice.
And he was going to introduce me, and we've had wonderful conversations about this, and it snowed. And we had to cancel, which is a tragedy, but yes.
If you have time, I interviewed him. It's only 2 or 3 episodes ago. It's Michael
I'm writing it down.
He just released a book called the name just escaped me. But it's kind of his, as someone who is a regular congregant of him, the book is very much what he preaches from the Bima. Everyday spirituality from a Jewish lens.
Oh, I look forward to this.
I use the podcast as a chance to get him to tell the full stories of little things I had heard him say from the Bima.
Nice.
So it's a little bit selfish of me, the interview, but it's
But then you share. Yeah.
So
I'm sure we're coming close to the edging to the end of time here. So could I just do like a couple minutes on the takeaways?
Absolutely.
Because I've referred to a couple times as like living with a pilgrim's heart thing. And when I talk about that, I am talking about, we talked about pilgrimage was about intention and destination, but it is also very much about learning to be very much in the present on the way to where we're going. It's not a marathon It's not a sprint. It is about being absolutely where we are. And Father Jose, over and over again, of course we wanted to know, is there a laundry room at the next hostel?
Uh-huh.
What time are we stopping for lunch? Like all these questions. And he just kept saying, like, try to be in this moment, this meal, this path, these trees, this prayer, these pilgrims, just what is right in front of you. And so learning to live, obviously we all have goals, but as I have taken to saying, we cannot breathe tomorrow's oxygen. Like, how do we live with what is right in front of us? And then the other thing, and this is both pilgrim and Ignatian spirituality. So when my feet were absolutely terrible, it became clear the night before we were supposed to walk to Zaragoza, it became clear that neither Porter nor I should walk the next day. And so Father Jose gave us directions for how to get where we were going on the train, by which I mean he told us where the train was and where to get off. Directions is putting it a little more clearly than it was. But the night the night where we were going to have to get up and take the train, I emailed my spiritual director, Susan, who has walked with me, no pun intended, for more than 20 years now. And I said, I failed to prepare adequately. Because I did. I should have hiked more hills. I should have figured out my boots better. I should have spent more time on the Stairmaster, by which I mean any time at all. Yes, so I failed to prepare adequately, and now I am at risk of failing the pilgrimage. Can you just play the tiny violin for me, please? Mm-hmm. Such a tragedy. I was a mess. And Susan wrote back, through the wonder of the time difference, Susan's response was in my inbox when I got home, or woke up the next morning. And she said, you cannot fail the Camino if you truly see it as a spiritual quest. And then she said, let go of all the hopes and musings and imaginings that preceded the reality of what is happening, and open yourself to what is being offered through the reality of what is happening. That sentence, and I throw the word grace in there when I just talk about it because I felt obliged to quote her directly from the email, but we've had a lot of conversations about this, and grace is the operative word here. Let go of all the musings and imaginings that preceded the reality of what is happening. Open yourself to the grace that is being offered through, not despite, the reality of what is happening.
Yeah.
That is wisdom for every dang day.
Yeah.
Because we have a mental picture in our mind of everything. What's today going to be like? What was this conversation that you and I just had going to be like?
Right.
What's this next hotel room going to be like? We can't help but form a mental image, and yet we have to let go of it. She also said, she's often said, every conversation, every sentence that begins with "what if" is probably from the evil spirit. And as I was getting ready to leave for the Camino, I was awash in what ifs.
Yeah.
What if I can't bring myself to pee in the woods?
Right.
What if I can't find timely morning coffee? All the what ifs. And she said, we cannot live in the what ifs because we have not been given the grace to meet them yet. We are not given the grace until we need it, and then it appears. And, and that's how we walk on pilgrimage and in life. We take one step at a time. We try to be present to what's right in front of us. We try to rely on and be reliable to the people who share the road with us. And we open ourselves to the grace as it unfolds. And that's what it is to be a pilgrim in this world.
Wow.
And sometimes we manage it, and often we don't. And we try again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a really powerful summation.
Thank you. And I wasn't reading from anything. I feel really good about that. I was just like, close your eyes and say it. You know what you mean.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend the other day about because I'm in a bit of a dip. I'm in a bit of a low point as we're talking.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just in a bit of a low point. And I was like, can we keep, I was like, my job for 15 years was, I worked in public relations, and I was rewarded for being able to catastrophize every situation. And that is no longer my profession, but unfortunately I have become very skilled at it. And living in the what ifs and living in the worst, worrying about the worst possible outcomes. So that was I would say, a very timely little sermon for me to hear.
So now may I read you, if only for you, one short thing. Feel free to just slice this out if we run out of time. So this thing that Susan just said about the grace won't be there until it's time. I said, I knew she was right. I'd experienced that sort of rising to meet me grace before. I had even experienced it, now that I thought about it, in relation to one of my what ifs. During COVID, Porter's bladder cancer had resurfaced, requiring him to be on monthly chemo throughout 2022. Yet the Camino would be taking us out of the country for 5 weeks. In late summer, we met with 2 of his nurses to book the next several rounds of treatment. Those good women twisted themselves into pretzels, trying to schedule a series of infusions that would meet the protocols for minimum and maximum intervals while leapfrogging over our travels. Looking at Chris's and Jenny's scrunched faces, peering at their calendars and scribbled notes, I braced myself for them to swivel around, hands on hips, and say, "Do you not understand that he has cancer?" But they never did. Patiently, they figured it out. When I thanked them profusely for all the time and trouble, they waved me off, saying, "We understand cancer is only one part of your life." What can I say? Sometimes the grace that rises to meet you is wearing scrubs. And I can't read it without crying, and I hear you over there.
Yeah.
Sometimes the grace that rises to meet you is wearing scrubs.
Yep. I did that on that first trip back to Israel, was in between immunotherapy infusions. And now I get monthly biologic infusions. So I went to Africa this summer on safari. And it was like, okay, where will I be in my infusions? Can we go a week late? Can we go a week early? But yeah. The nurses in particular in infusion centers do so much to give us the rest of our lives.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. Oh, my dear.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm excited to get my little hands on this book. Before we say goodbye, do you have any inkling of wanting to do another pilgrimage?
My answer to that always is yes, and not until after I figure out my feet.
Yeah.
Because I still haven't. I mean, we went to New York a while back and walked from Penn Station to the southern tip of the island, and I got a blister.
Oh, no.
Like, I don't know. I did not used to be a person who got blisters. I don't know what is wrong with my feet. I don't know what I have to do, but I would love to do something like this again.
Yeah.
And not until after both of us actually figure out the blister situation.
Right.
Because I don't want to do that again. I don't want to sign up for that.
Are there bike pilgrimages? Could you do this on a bicycle?
Yeah, one could. Some people do the Camino de Santiago on a bike. Okay. It'd have to be an electric bike.
Sure, why not? Even better.
Which seems to take, some of, there's one point near the end when we're climbing to Montserrat, which was spectacular. I said I wanted to feel Ignatius's striving in my bones. Like, as much as I was just a tortured mess by the Cantabrian mountains at the beginning, I was so glad to be mountain climbing, to put it, to exaggerate slightly, but to be climbing in the mountains at the end. There was something about the physical experience of doing that and having to strive for it that was tremendously satisfying. So I'd like to do it again without blisters.
Where can people find you online and find this book?
Sure. So the book is available wherever books are sold online. My website, which I'm sure will be in your show notes,
yes.
ChristineMarieEberle.com, only with hyphens between all the parts of my name. You can find all the things, all my speaking engagements and Zoom things and other books and Lent supplement. It's all going to be there.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
And obviously, if people want to hire you for a Zoom retreat or an in-person retreat, they can contact you through your website.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a contact button right there.
Outstanding. Yeah. Well, Christine, thank you so much for joining me, coming back on Finding Favorites and reaching out again. I love having authors return. I love that I've been doing this podcast long enough that I have had multiple authors publish multiple books. It's so cool. Nice. Well, I look forward to the next excuse to converse with you. Great. With that, you can find Finding Favorites anywhere podcasts are given away freely. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts. Please rate it 5 stars, give it a thumbs up, leave a review, recommend it to your friends and family and your enemies, whoever. Christine, thank you so much. You are so welcome, Leah.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.